Next speaker is, are we ready? Okay, Regina Paulose. Did I say that right?
You did.
You said I did?
Yes, you did.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Who is an international criminal law attorney based in the United States. He has been working as a member of the Secretariat of the Congress of the Nations and States. Also, she has her JD from Seattle University School of Law, her LLM in International Crime and Justice from the University of Torino, and was the chair of the steering committee of the United Kingdom's Child Sex Abusive People's Tribunal. Everybody, please give a warm welcome for Regina Paulose. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to assume that you can hear me until somebody stops me.
Yes.
I'm very excited to be back. I took part in the conference last year, and I thought it was such an amazing experience to be able to interact with so many great scholars. And I thought I would come back this year to share about something that I have been working on and developing with many people in this organization called the Congress of Nations and States. And so before I begin, I do want to just nitpick at terminology really quick. In the Congress of Nations and States, which I'll abbreviate as CNS, we use the term peoples, which I think the last person who commented on Malcolm Barrero's on presentation pretty much kind of sums up the reason why we use that. Many people refer to themselves as indigenous. They may call themselves Aboriginal, First Nations, tribal people, but also there are a lot of groups, communities around the world that do not use those terms, but do identify with the same type of cultural components. And they may not use it because the governments don't allow them to use it or to call themselves that. So we use the term peoples. And so I just want you all to be aware of who we're talking about when we use that term. CNS was restarted in 2019. And in the 1990s, there was an effort made after the failure of the World Indigenous Council to continue. That council had been started like in the 70s, and there was a lot of gathering, but it had a couple of setbacks. Number one, being financial. Number two, being the fact that it didn't really represent a whole lot of the peoples around the world who needed access to an organization like that. Also, they did a lot of work within the UN system. And so CNS came about partly inspired by the leader who started the World Indigenous Council. But in the 90s, it fell apart, a lot of it having to do with philosophical, I would say, differences between how the states wanted to handle CNS. So fast forward to 2019, after a couple of years of regrouping and trying to figure out how they wanted to approach this, in 2019, a group of people's leaders from different communities came together from around the world and said, we want to restart this organization. And this time we want to change the way we approach it, which is we don't need to wait for state governments to join us. We'll go ahead and start. And as they see what we're doing, they'll join. So CNS was restarted in 2019. Our first assembly took place in 2022 in Belfast. We'll be rotating that assembly around every 2 years. Our hope actually is that it will be taking place somewhere in Africa or Asia in 2024. But the reason why I was brought on board, and you heard a little bit about my background, was because one of the reasons why they wanted to restart CNS was this need for access to justice and to be able to figure out how peoples around the world can truly access and figure out kind of how to deal with the situations that they were facing, particularly genocide, crimes against humanity. And so I had begun drafting what's now called the International People's Crimes Treaty. I'll put a copy of it in the chat for everyone online. And then I have sent, I believe, Star an email with this document so that you all can have it. Our website's being updated, so that should become live within the next 2 days, but you can go to the same link and you'll be able to see it there as well. And so what the treaty does, and it was already adopted, so it is technically a live treaty, but it's going through its implementation phase now, is that members of CNS and pretty much anybody who belongs to these communities around the world can join. The treaty focuses on a couple of parallels. Number one is that we take the approach that local communities have probably the best solutions to justice. And it's not necessarily that everything has to be internationalized or use an international mechanism. So what CNS does is it goes into the local communities and say, okay, what is it that you need? And whether it's about having, more people to work on, building a system within their language, within their culture, however that may be, that gets help. Or the concept of universal jurisdiction. So it might be that maybe the Maori in New Zealand are willing to help out and try a perpetrator in their system because the perpetrator has fled from another system and another community is looking to hold that person accountable. So it allows communities to work together even if they're not in the same geographic location. But the second thing that it does is it creates its own mechanism in case those justice systems can't work. So a good example on a community that I work with very often is the Rohingya of Burma. And, there's over 1 million people sitting in a refugee camp now. They don't have access to the ability to create their own justice system. So in the meantime, CNS fills in that vacuum if should they want to bring something forward. And we have what's called an elder council in which the cases come to first, and which it's discussed with this elder council exactly what it is that the victims and survivors want to achieve. And then after that, the elder council will make some decisions. Number one, it can continue to go forward in our mechanism. Maybe the elder council will say, look, we think there might be another way for you all to resolve these issues, or what you're looking to accomplish is not something that this mechanism can do, or perhaps CNS needs to go a different route. But the second thing is that from there, once the elder council decides that the case should go forward, it goes into one of two chambers. Chamber one is a conciliation mechanism that brings all the parties together to have a discussion about what it is that people actually want. The purpose of this particular chamber is an emphasis on prevention. So I was interested in hearing what the other speakers had to say this morning, because I do think that there are some aspects of prevention that I think sometimes are misunderstood in genocide. And so, for instance, it could be that maybe there is a law in place that needs to be repealed because it could lead to violence, or it has a disproportionate impact on the peoples within the place that we're talking about. And so in that case, what we would do in that conciliation mechanism, or we would work to really arbitrate and see if we could repeal the law, or we could figure out what other solutions are needed. But of course, the solutions and whatever the people want is what we focus on, not CNS coming up organically with an idea that doesn't really make sense in the locality that it is. The second chamber codifies what are called people's tribunals. And you heard in my background, one of the ones that I've worked on. I've also worked on the most recent one, the Aban Tribunal, focusing on crimes against humanity in Iran. And I worked on one in China, the China Tribunal, which worked on forced organ harvesting. And those people's tribunals are very successful because it is a victim and survivor led. They bring the evidence forward, they have people assess it, a report is produced, and then they take it and they do what they need to do. So what I would say in that regard is that if the people feel that that is probably a better avenue for them, we work that. We do not take cases that are already in the process of being litigated, whether it's within a state or regional or international issue, because the whole point is for complementarity to exist. We do want to, of course, have unique solutions and provide the type of things that the peoples themselves want. So technically speaking, this whole presentation, I probably need a half a day to present because it's very technical in terms of what treaty does. But like I said, the whole point of it really is to address genocide. The treaty does focus on genocide and different forms of genocide and crimes against humanity. And that's going to be the stage for the treaty for the next 5 years. 5 years from now, the Assembly can reopen the treaty and then open it up to adding war crimes, terrorism, whatever else that they want to look at. But we wanted to start off with genocide. And what's really unique is that we have, besides adopting the Genocide Convention's definition, we also created our own crime called environcide, which is really the systematic destruction of the structural environment of a people's. We've seen that in different areas of the world, whether it was prior to colonization, or different colonial entities came in, destroyed the environment so that the peoples couldn't survive where they are. We also have ecocide, and we also, of course, recognize ethnocide, which is our version of cultural genocide. So we incorporate those into the treaty, as well as the fact that we incorporate the rights of nature, which essentially means that somebody can come in parentis locus and on behalf of whether it is a river system or, a forest or whatever the case may be, that they can also apply a case and put a case through the CNS mechanism. So it is a very holistic mechanism in terms of how it looks and how it can work with different communities and their cultures. So with that, I'm actually going to stop, because in case you have any questions or if you want to go back to what the other speakers were talking about, but that's essentially what this is. And I think, like I said, everything else, a part of it is very technical, but CNS's ability to be able to respond in these situations, I think the ideal part of it is the fact that it will be very unique based on culturally what the survivors and victims of these kinds of crimes want to achieve. And a lot of times I think some of the misperceptions that exist in the world is that everybody wants somebody to go to jail, and that should be the end of the discussion, and that's all we do when it comes to genocide. But we're really talking sometimes about restructuring structures. We're talking about reparations, memorialization, education, as the first speakers talked about. And there's a whole lot of things that need to be incorporated, but we sometimes and very often forget to ask the survivors and victims what they actually want. And that is one of the things that we put at the forefront of our mechanism. So I wanted to thank you for the time, and I'm going to stop here and I'll open the floor for discussion. So thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much. So let's open up the floor. Do we have any questions? Anything in the chat?